Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Margaret, and here I share real-life stories from my friends at the nursing home. The night I stopped loving Daniel wasn't the night I found out he was cheating. It was the night I realized I didn't need to yell, cry, or even ask why. It was a Thursday in late March, and the wind off the East River still had teeth. I'd closed up the catering shop at 7, stayed behind to check inventory for the weekend's events, and was halfway through polishing the stainless steel counter when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an airline notification. Your flight to Miami is boarding. Gate C14. I frowned. My flights, when I booked them, came to my email, not text messages. I scrolled down. The booking name was Daniel M. Rothman. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. The man had told me he'd be in Chicago for 3 days. Meetings, corporate clients. A late winter storm, he'd said, so he might get delayed coming home. And now? Miami. I should have felt my heart drop. Maybe it did. But what I remember most was the taste of metal in my mouth, as if I'd bitten down on a coin. I rinsed my hands, dried them on a towel, and called my mother. Rachel? Her voice always carried a sort of crispness, even after retirement. 40 years as an attorney did that to you. Daniel's in Miami, I said, not bothering with a preamble. He told me he was in Chicago. A pause. You're sure? Got his boarding notification by mistake. Another pause. Then, do not call him. Not yet. That was my mother, Elaine. 68, sharp as a tack, and somehow more dangerous in her cardigan and pearls than most men in suits. She didn't say the word affair. She didn't need to. I walked home from the shop through Queen's streets that smelled faintly of fried food and car exhaust, my breath visible in the air. Inside our brick townhouse, everything was in its place. Daniel liked it that way. The brass umbrella stand, the framed photo of us in the Catskills, the coat hooks aligned at even heights. I noticed the silence most. Daniel always left the TV on when he packed for trips, some sports channel running in the background. I climbed the stairs, went into our bedroom, and opened his closet. 3 suits gone. A navy carry-on missing from the top shelf. His tie rack was still full, though. Daniel hated wearing ties, unless he absolutely had to. I closed the door quietly, as if not to wake anyone. At 11 that night, I got another notification, a charge at the Fontainebleau Hotel, Miami Beach. I almost laughed. If you were going to be a cliché, why not go all in? I sat on the bed, phone in hand, and thought about the 29 years Daniel and I had been married. We'd built a catering business together from a 2-burner stove in a rented kitchen. I'd handled menus, clients, the food. He'd handled the accounts and the networking. He was the charming frontman, the handshake, the drink at the bar after the event. I was the one lugging crates of hors d'oeuvres in heels. And over time, the balance had shifted. His voice carried more weight with clients. His name was the one people remembered. Mine was the one that appeared in small print under operations. I thought about the day we signed the papers for this house. He'd squeezed my hand and said, "We did it, Rach." I'd believed him then. But sitting there, with Miami glowing on my phone screen, I realized Daniel had been treating me like background music for years. By Friday morning, I had a plan forming, not revenge, not yet, just control. At 8, I was at my mother's apartment in Forest Hills. She greeted me with a cup of black coffee and a yellow legal pad. First, she said, we gather proof. No hearsay, no assumptions. You'll need dates, locations, expenses. The more, the better. I'm not sure I want to. Yes, you do. She cut me off. You're angry now. Tomorrow, you'll be practical. But you'll still need this. If it's nothing, we toss it. If it's something. She didn't finish the sentence. We spent 3 hours combing through our joint credit card statements online. There it was. 2 airline tickets to Miami, charged 3 days ago. Dinners at restaurants we'd never been to in Midtown. A jewelry purchase from a boutique in Soho, mid-December. My mother's pen scratched across the legal pad. Dates, amounts, merchant names. Now, she said, do you have access to the business accounts? Yes, I hesitated. He trusts me with payroll. Then move your salary, quietly, regularly, into your personal account, and stop using the joint card. Something shifted in me then. I wasn't just a wife hurt by betrayal. I was a woman pulling on gloves before surgery. Saturday afternoon, I called Daniel's assistant, a 24-year-old named Brianna, who thought I was cool because I always remembered her birthday. Hey, Bri, I said casually. Daniel told me he left a folder on his desk that I need for a client proposal. Any chance you can check? A pause. He's not in Chicago, right? My pulse skipped. Why? I got an email from him yesterday about rescheduling the presentation, and the timestamp was weird, like Eastern time. She lowered her voice. And his calendar says Miami, Fontainebleau. So it wasn't just me. He'd stopped caring about hiding it. That night, lying in bed alone, I thought about confrontation, about waiting for him to come home, about the inevitable scene, raised voices, tears, accusations. I thought about him blaming me for not being there for him, or being too focused on work. I could practically hear his lines, rehearsed over the years. And I realized I didn't want a scene. I wanted a conclusion, one that left no room for him to twist the story. Sunday morning, I met my mother again. This time she brought a file box. We're going to secure your position, she said. House, business, finances. Then, when you're ready, you end it on your terms. I didn't argue. We spent hours drafting a quiet campaign. My name was already on the deed to the house. I would change the locks the day he returned. My stake in the business was documented. Elaine would make sure his removal went through the right legal channels. The accounts would be adjusted so my share was protected. And, most importantly, I would keep my face calm until the last piece was in place. By Monday afternoon, Daniel posted a picture on Facebook. Him on a yacht, drink in hand, wearing sunglasses I'd never seen before. The woman beside him was maybe 35, tanned, hair in a glossy ponytail. Her name was tagged, Samantha Reed. I saved the image, closed the app, and went back to work. That week, I started making small moves, transferring modest amounts into my personal savings, setting up new passwords for my email and phone, making an appointment with a locksmith I trusted. I kept my tone warm when Daniel called, once on Wednesday evening. How's Chicago? I asked. He hesitated. Cold. Meetings all day. I smiled into the receiver. Don't work too hard. When we hung up, I sent my mother a message. He lied again. Game on. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the waiting. Waiting for him to feel untouchable. Waiting for the pieces to align. And by the time Friday rolled around, they had. Friday evening, I stood at the kitchen counter slicing lemons for the weekend's catering job, the blade rhythmically tapping the wood. Outside, the streetlights had just flickered on, pooling pale gold across the wet pavement. Daniel was still in Miami, his conference supposedly running into the weekend. I'd stopped looking at his posts. Every new picture, every grinning shot with Samantha was just fuel, and I didn't want to run on anger. I wanted to run on precision. The phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me wanted to know. Rachel? The voice was male, slightly strained. Yes? This is Kevin. I work with Daniel. I said nothing, letting the silence pull him forward. I don't know what's going on with him, but he asked me to cover a meeting this week, and well, he's in Miami, with a flight attendant. Half the office knows. A part of me flinched, being talked about like that, like I was the last to know. Another part of me filed Kevin's words away. It wasn't just our home he'd walked away from. It was the business. The face of the company was tanning on a yacht, while contracts waited unsigned. Thanks for telling me, I said finally. My voice was even, steady. That night, I moved the first large transfer, $25,000 from our business account to my personal one. My mother had drafted the paperwork weeks ago, marking it as a partial distribution of profit. Perfectly legal, untouchable. The next morning, I had the locks changed, a new deadbolt, a reinforced strike plate. The locksmith, a big man with kind eyes, didn't ask why. "Lot of folks doing this lately," he said, fitting the cylinder. I wondered how many of them were in my position. By Sunday, Daniel had racked up another 5,000 in charges. Expensive dinners, spa treatments, champagne. The Fontainebleau must have been sparkling with his money. I watched the numbers climb on my banking app and thought, you're spending the last of your freedom, and you don't even know it. Monday morning, I arrived at the catering shop early. The kitchen smelled faintly of yeast and coffee. Marisol, our head baker, was icing trays of cupcakes. "Daniel coming in today?" she asked. "Not sure," I said, hanging up my coat. "He's still traveling." Her brow furrowed. "He's been gone a while." I gave her a small smile. "It won't be much longer?" That afternoon, I met my mother at her apartment again. She laid out the next step like a general reviewing a battle map. "Tomorrow, you freeze the joint credit cards. Move the remaining household funds into your account. By Wednesday, file for legal separation. That way, when he lands in New York, he's got nothing to walk back into." "And the business?" I asked. Her lips curved. "We'll hold a board meeting without him." We were equal partners on paper. Elaine had already drafted the notice. A vote to remove him as managing partner, citing prolonged absence and dereliction of duty. All we needed was one more vote. Marisol's husband, who'd invested in the early days, still held a small share. I'd already called him. He owed me a favor. Tuesday morning, I shut down his access to our shared credit lines. The bank clerk, a young man with a neat beard, didn't bat an eye when I slid the paperwork across the counter. "Mr. Rothman will be notified by text and email," he said. "Good," I replied. "I want him to know." By Wednesday afternoon, Daniel's name was gone from the business's internal system as managing partner. His office keycard had been deactivated. That evening, as I was locking up the shop, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Daniel. "Rach, there's some problem with the cards? My room won't. Can you call me back, please?" His voice had that edge I'd only heard twice before. Once, when his car was towed in the middle of winter, and once when we lost a major contract. But this time, there was something else. Panic. I didn't call back. Thursday morning, a second voicemail came. "Rachel, I'm stranded here. Sam, she left. I don't have enough cash for a ticket home. What the hell is going on? Call me. Please. I listened twice, then forwarded it to my mother with the subject line, Phase 3. By Friday, he was back in New York. Not at the house. He couldn't get in, but at the shop. I found him standing outside the front door at 9 a.m., wearing the same shirt from the yacht photo, now wrinkled. "What the hell is this?" he demanded as I approached. "Good morning, Daniel," I said, brushing past him to unlock the door. "Don't good morning me. You froze my accounts, You mean our accounts?" I said, turning to face him. And yes, I did. His face flushed, the vein at his temple throbbing. "You can't just—" "I can," I cut in. "And I did. You abandoned the business. You lied about your trip. You spent thousands of dollars of our joint money on her." I didn't say Samantha's name. I didn't need to. He glanced at the street, as if hoping no one was watching. "We can talk about this inside." "No," I said. "We can talk about this in court." The days after that were a blur of paperwork. Legal separation filed. Business restructuring finalized. Daniel's personal belongings boxed, labeled, and delivered to a storage unit. I didn't see him again until the following Tuesday, when I received a text from Kevin. "You might want to hear this." Attached was a voice memo. Daniel, leaving a desperate message for a client. "I'm going through a personal situation. If you could front the deposit, I'll make it worth your while. Just don't mention this to Rachel." I saved it. By Thursday, the final piece of my plan slid into place. I forwarded that voicemail to the company's group email. No commentary, no explanation. Just Daniel's own voice, pleading and cornered. By the end of the day, 3 clients had called to confirm they'd be working with me directly. That evening, I walked into my freshly repainted apartment. The walls were a soft dove grey now. The heavy drapes Daniel liked were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let in the streetlight glow. A vase of tulips sat on the dining table. My mother was in the kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "It's done," I said. She handed me a glass. "No, Rachel, it's begun." The first Monday of April, the weather finally broke. Sunlight warming the sidewalks, the air smelling faintly of thawed earth. I woke before my alarm, the pale light spilling across the linen curtains. For a moment, I lay there, listening. No heavy footsteps in the hall, no morning news blaring from the living room. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. I made coffee in the kitchen, the good kind I'd always reserved for guests, and carried it to the dining table. My laptop waited, the day's schedule already open, a morning client tasting, a midday meeting with the event coordinator from the Botanical Gardens, and a call with a bakery in Brooklyn about a potential collaboration. Every slot was mine, every deal, my name. At 10 o'clock, Kevin called. "Just so you know," he said, voice low, "Daniel came by the office this morning. Security wouldn't let him in." I pictured it. Daniel in his tailored jacket, trying to smile his way past the desk guard, realizing his card didn't work. "What did he do?" I asked. "Yelled, threatened to fix everything, then left. Honestly, Rach, people are starting to avoid him. That email you sent—" He trailed off. I sipped my coffee. It wasn't an email, it was the truth. That afternoon, I ran into Marisol outside the shop. She handed me a paper bag with a warm loaf of bread inside. "For the new chapter," she said with a wink. "How's Daniel taking all this?" I asked. She rolled her eyes. "Like a man who's never been told no in his life." By Wednesday, I started hearing the whispers. A catering contract he'd been managing personally had dropped him. The yacht photos, oh, those yacht photos, were circulating among clients with captions that weren't flattering. And then there was the Fontainebleau bill, which he still hadn't paid in full. I knew because a collections notice had been delivered to the shop before I redirected the mail. I didn't share that with him. Let him hear it from someone else. Friday evening, my mother came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of Pinot. She set the bag on the counter and gave me a look. "He's going to try something," she said. "Like what?" "Appeal to your sympathy, remind you of the early years, make promises he won't keep. And when that doesn't work, he'll go on the offensive." I leaned against the counter. "And we'll be ready." We didn't have to wait long. Saturday morning, a text from Daniel lit up my phone. "Rachel, please. I need to explain. I made a mistake. Let me come home." I stared at it for a full minute before replying. "You have no home here." The next week, he called 3 times. I answered once. "Rachel, I can't believe you're doing this," he began, his voice tight. "After everything we built." "I'm not the one who walked away from it," I said. "You don't understand, Samantha." "I understand perfectly." I cut him off. "You made a choice, and so did I." After that, I stopped taking his calls. Kevin told me he'd seen Daniel at a bar near the office, sitting alone with a half-empty glass in front of him, his shirt untucked, his hair uncombed. The image should have made me sad. Instead, it felt like confirmation. The man who'd once been so careful about appearances couldn't even hold himself together for a public drink. 2 weeks later, the opportunity for the final move came unexpectedly. One of our oldest clients, a high-end law firm, called to request my personal handling of their upcoming gala. The woman on the phone, Margaret, lowered her voice near the end. "You know, we were approached by Daniel last week. He offered to undercut your price by 30% if we'd hire him privately." I let out a quiet breath. "And what did you say?" She laughed softly. "We said we don't hire thieves." That night, I sent Daniel one last message. Not words, just a single audio file. His own desperate voicemail to the client, the one where he'd begged for an advance and promised favors. I didn't add a caption. 2 days later, Kevin texted, "He's gone, packed up his apartment, no one knows where." I didn't reply. The house felt lighter every day. I'd had the kitchen painted a pale cream, replaced the heavy leather sofa with a soft grey sectional. The rooms smelled faintly of lavender from the new candles I'd placed on the shelves. On Sunday mornings, I'd walk to the farmer's market, buy fresh flowers, and arrange them in the vase on the dining table. Sometimes my mother joined me, sometimes not. Either way, I no longer rushed through the quiet hours. It wasn't that I'd stopped thinking about Daniel. I had. But now, when I did, it was like remembering a book I'd read years ago, vivid in places, but belonging to a different life. One evening, after a long day of tastings, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the lights of Manhattan flicker in the distance. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I hope you're happy." I typed back without hesitation. "I am." The first summer without Daniel came fast. By June, the shop was busier than ever. Clients who'd once hesitated now sought me out directly, praising my attention to detail, my calm, the way everything just worked under my watch. In the past, I might have deferred some of that credit to Daniel, let him bask in the compliments. Now I accepted them without deflection. One afternoon, after delivering a wedding cake to a reception in Brooklyn Heights, I found myself lingering in the courtyard. The fountain splashed gently, the air smelled of peonies and buttercream, and I realized I wasn't thinking about where Daniel might be or who he might be with. The mental space he'd once filled was empty, and that emptiness felt like fresh air. At home, the transformation was nearly complete. The heavy oak desk he'd insisted on keeping in the living room was gone, replaced by a small writing table where I kept my laptop and fresh notebooks. The leather armchairs had been sold. In their place, two soft chairs in cream linen faced each other by the window. One Saturday, my mother brought over a housewarming gift. Though I'd been here for years, she said it was time to claim it as mine. It was a framed black and white photograph of the Queensborough Bridge, the lights glimmering on the East River. "New York will always carry you," she said. "You just had to let go of the dead weight." Daniel tried twice more to reach me over the summer. Once by email, an apology laced with self-pity. Once by leaving a handwritten note at the shop that simply read, "I miss us." I didn't reply either time. There was nothing left to say, and no reason to give him even the smallest thread to pull on. By August, the business was thriving. I hired 2 new staff members and partnered with the Brooklyn bakery I'd been courting. We launched a line of artisanal pastries that sold out every weekend. Our reputation spread beyond Queens. Inquiries came in from Manhattan, Long Island, even upstate. One evening, Kevin stopped by the shop after closing. "You know," he said, leaning on the counter, "I think you scared him." "Scared who?" I asked, though I knew. "Daniel. He thought you'd scream, cry, maybe take a little money and move on. He never thought you'd take everything." I looked at him for a moment, then shook my head. I didn't take everything. I took back what was already mine. The final loose end tied itself up in September. A mutual acquaintance mentioned in passing that Daniel was working odd jobs for a catering company in Miami, one of the smaller, less reputable ones. His partner had left him. The yacht crowd had moved on, and he was living in a one-bedroom near the airport. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard it. I felt nothing. That was the real victory. Autumn came, crisp and golden. On a Saturday morning, I took the subway into Manhattan and walked the High Line, the Hudson sparkling under the clear sky. I stopped for coffee at a little cafe I'd never tried before and sat outside, watching strangers pass. No one knew me here. No one saw me as Daniel's wife or the other half of Rothman Catering. I was just a woman in a cream sweater, sipping coffee, smiling to herself. That night, back at the apartment, I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and opened the balcony doors. The city hummed in the distance. I thought about the last year, the shock, the planning, the quiet execution of every step. I thought about the moment, back in March, when my mother had said, "It's begun." She'd been right. Ending my marriage hadn't been the conclusion. It had been the opening scene of the life I was meant to live. I raised my glass toward the skyline, not to Daniel, not to revenge, but to myself. I'd learned that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, meticulous, and leaves you standing in the sunlight while the other person fades into their own shadow. And in that quiet, I was finally free.